Hi everyone, this is Mona back with day 3 of our IMA for Beginners webinar series. Today we will be covering IMA features. As usual, we are recording today's webinar. I will be sending out the video link and PowerPoint later today to those who are attending. So if you can test out your chat today by answering the following questions. Have you ever reviewed the Changes tab to determine your item's location in the IMA workflow? So just yes or no. And then how do you typically do change requests in IMA? Do you sync changes? Do you use the changes grid, manually edit, or you've never created a change request? So again, have you ever reviewed the Changes tab to determine your item's location? And then do you typically, how do you typically do change requests? And I'll come back to these responses in a moment. Just as a reminder, because the last 2 days I've ended up having to mute all the participants at some point, please put your phone on mute when you're not speaking, because I do prefer to leave the line open so people can audibly ask questions, but when there's a lot of background noise, I have to put everybody on mute until the end, and I just prefer not to do that. So if you are listening through your computer, you still have to mute your computer's microphone. And if you don't know how to access your computer's microphone, you can access it by going to Control Panel, Sound, and then Recording tab. Also, just as a reminder, I will have designated points with that blue bubble graphic where you can audibly ask questions, and please keep them on topic and minimal. If it's anything that requires more digging or just more of a kind of a deep dive, if you could email Vendor University at SearsHC.com, include any details that I might need to answer your questions, such as KSNs or USs, or screenshots. Screenshots can be really, really helpful when we're troubleshooting to be able to answer your questions correctly. Please feel free to use the chat at any time during the presentation. And I did ask a couple of questions. If you've reviewed the Changes tab before to determine your item's location, and also how do you typically do change requests? So some of these I got answers looks like separately. So looks like there's some people who have never looked at the Changes tab, which is kind of what I expected. We do have one person that has. We have someone doing changes manually, a few people actually. Never created a change request. Let's see. Someone brand new to IMA, so they've also never done change requests. So a lot of people who have either never done change requests or are doing them manually. And it seems like most of you have not utilized the Changes tab. And that can be really helpful in determining the location of your item. And we're going to be going over all of that today. If this is your first day joining us, my name is Mona. I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager for the Vendor and Item Support Team, and I do manage our Vendor University program here at SHC. On Monday, we covered IMA basics and terminology, and then yesterday we went over setting up new items in the new item grid. Today, we're going to be covering IMA features. So we're going to be covering Quick Search and the Changes tab, as well as your Returned Items task list, your Change Existing Items feature, your Data Catalog notifications, and your General task list. So whenever you go and hover over Data Catalog, you get a variety of selections you can choose from. We've covered new items that we did yesterday with the new item grid. We also did the grid history yesterday as well. So today we're covering these 3 additional, the returned items, change existing items, that's also your changes grid, and the data catalog notifications. And another task list that you may access is under the task list in the main menu and general. So we're going to discuss all of those today. So first up is Quick Search and Changes tab. So what is Quick Search? Quick Search provides a summary of basic information and workflow status for a single KSN. It's a really fast method to figure out where your item is in the workflow and if it's operational or if it's still in process. So to utilize Quick Search, you use the drop-down to select the criteria to search for. Also, to get to Quick Search, you can click Search right up here in the menu bar. But you use that drop-down. The fields that are going to be the most relevant to you as a vendor to search for would be KSN, UPC, or core item number if you're on the Sears side. If you're on the Kmart side, then it would just be KSN number and UPC. So one of the nice things about it is when you change your selection in the drop-down, the example underneath the input field is going to update so that it is telling you the format that it should be entered in. So with KSNs, you may remember there's actually a dash and a check digit at the end, but whenever you do a quick search for a KSN, you actually have to omit that dash and check digit. If you leave those on, you're not going to get any search results back. In this example, core item number was selected from the drop-down, and here you'll see it gave an example for core division item, and it's 3-digit Sears division, and then the dash, and then the 4 or 5-digit item number. And the status for this one is existing. That means that it's operational and that the item can be ordered. There's nothing under next steps because there are no next steps. Nothing needs to be done with this. It's ready to go. Whenever you do a quick search for an item, you will always see your KSN number on this page. And if you have a Sears item, then you will also see the core item number on this page as well. There's also a quick reference to your SHC hierarchy, the division, category, and subcategory. And then at the very bottom of the page, it gives kind of a graphic depiction of where your item is in the workflow process. Whenever everything is good to go and it's ready to be ordered, all of these boxes will be blue going across the bottom, and they will say complete. Now in this example, you will see that UPC was selected, and here it updated the example for the UPC to show what type of input you should be putting into the field. The status for this one is in process, and under next steps, it says that it's in the vendor role. So you as the vendor would know that there's something that needs to be done by you to get this item moving through to the next role. So the graphic depiction at the bottom, the workflow rows box is green, and it has a date there. Now that date is when it first started into the workflow rows. And workflow rows refers to any of the manual rows in IMA. You may remember on day 1 at the very end, we went over the workflow process, and the 4 manual rows are vendor, merchant, inventory analyst, and supply chain. So if it's in any of those rows, then the graphic depiction down here is going to have the workflow rows box in green. And then hold state, bridging, and operational, you'll see they're not filled in with a color, and they also say not reached yet. So we know that this item requires action to reach completed status. So this example is a little bit trickier. This status is existing changes pending. So that means that this item has been operational. There could be orders out on the item or not, but it was able to be ordered. And now there's changes on the item that are pending. So under next, whoops, let me go back one screen. There we go. Under next steps, it says that it's in the workflow row. Well, we don't really know what row that is because that could be referring to vendor, merchant, inventory, or supply chain. So we don't know if any action is actually required by you as the vendor just by looking at this page. And that's kind of the downfall of a quick search, is that it is just a snapshot of your item. And sometimes you do need a bit more information to know if there's anything that you need to be doing to get this item moving along and back to operational. So in the graphic depiction, you'll see that the operational box is blue and says complete, but then hold state and bridging are not filled in, and then workflow rows is green again with a date. And that date is whenever the change request that is currently pending was created. So we know that there's some action that this needs, we just don't know who needs to complete the action. So to see more detail, you can click the Changes tab. It's the very far right tab, and it says Changes. And when you click that, you'll be able to see more detail about the item. So in this example, we see that the workflow state, it says vendor create /review. And then under change detail, you can actually see what changes were initiated for this item. So we can see that there is a new Oh, okay. I hadn't muted anybody yet, but it sounds like they stopped it or they muted their mic, so that's good. Again, if you could please keep your mics muted. I really don't want to have to mute everybody. I prefer not to. But got some nice elevator music in the meantime. Okay, so getting back to the presentation. So we can see the change detail and we can see the workflow state, and that's where these changes are currently residing. So locating the item. All right, so after making changes to an item, the merchant or inventory analyst keeps telling me to, can anybody else hear me? I just got a note saying that someone.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so it sounds like it's just, okay, now they're saying they can't hear me. All right, I just wanted to double check since I did get a note. Awesome. Okay, so you made changes to an item, and then your merchant or inventory analyst keeps telling you to approve your items, but you're pretty sure that you already did. And when you do a quick search for the KSN, it's showing that it's in the merchant role. So here under Next Steps, you can see that it says it's in the merchant role. The issue is that part of the item might be in the merchant role, but part of it could also be in the vendor role and requires action by you. So you always want to kind of drill down into your item more just to make sure, because your buyer may be crazy. They may just be thinking that you have to do something on it, but that may not be the case. You may actually have something that you do need to complete on that item. So if you click the Changes tab, you'll be able to see more detail. So here we can see under Workflow State, there's quite a number of pieces of your item. So if you remember Monday, we talked about like the packages, vendor packs, KSN item, and core item, and how those were all pieces of your item. Well, those pieces can get separated into different roles. And so that's where you can see it broken out here. We can see under Entity, we can see each of the pieces of your item that currently exist and are pending. And then over on the right, we can see Workflow State. So we do see that some of these are in the vendor role, and then two at the bottom are in the merchant role. Well, Quick Search can only show a single role that the item is in at a time. And so that's why you need to click the Changes tab to be able to view where all of the pieces of your item are located, because they could be separated. So in this instance, you would have some action required by you as the vendor. So always be sure to check your Changes tab. So we're going to look at a few other examples. In this one, you do a quick search and it says existing changes pending, and then it's in the workflow role. So here under type, we can see that this is a change request that's affecting the vendor pack if you look under entity. And the change detail, it's a cost change. So workflow state says vendor review / update. So this is a change request and it is pending approval in the vendor role. So most likely this example, it was created and approved by the merchant. The merchant created a change request. But that change request always has to be approved by you as the vendor as well. The same way, if you create a change request for your Sears items, then that change request is going to go to the merchant, and the merchant's going to have to approve it before it becomes operational. So there are some fields that kind of work as a checks and balance, where it can be created by somebody, but it still has to be approved by another role. So if this says vendor review / update, that means that you need to approve that change. Some other examples, so we have change requests initiated by other roles, and those will be found in your general task list. So if you hover over task list and click general task list, that's where you'll be able to find those changes. Now you could also approve them directly here by going to the workflow tab and selecting approve. We will be talking more about the general task list in just a few minutes. Also, if you have newly synced vendor packs, those are going to be found in your new item data catalog task list, and that's going to be indicated by OPR new. So when we looked at our task list yesterday, the item we were looking at just said new because it was a new item that had been synced over. Now, if you have to create a new vendor pack for an existing item, it's going to go to your new item data catalog task list. But under type, it'll say OPR new, operational new, and that just means it's a new vendor pack. And if you sync changes over, you do have to approve those in IMA as well. So if you sync a change over, it's going to be in your data catalog task list, and it'll be indicated by CHG for the type. Okay, in this example, we can see that a change request was created, but it was never approved because under workflow state, we see create change request. So in that instance, whoever the ID belongs to under initiator, they created this change request, but they forgot to approve it. And this happens a lot, not just by our vendors, but it does happen by our internal users as well. So just be sure that if you do create a change request, that you do approve it. So if you are the one who initiated that change request, if this ID belongs to you under initiator, then you would approve it by clicking the workflow tab. And if somebody else initiated the change request, then you would contact the user who created the request to approve it. Now you may know that user ID. It may be somebody else at your company, or it might be someone from your buying team. If you don't know who that ID belongs to, just contact your buying team or contact IMA help at searshc.com, and they'll reach out to whoever initiated the change. So in this example, this item has a new vendor pack, and it's currently in the vendor role. So here under entity, we can see a vendor pack, and under type you see new. So it's a new vendor pack. And under workflow state, you see vendor create / review entity. And initiator is e-catalog. Now when the initiator is e-catalog, that means that it was synced over from your data sync provider. So this new vendor pack was synced over. So in order to get this cleared out, or to get it moving on to the next role, you would load your new item data catalog task list, locate the OPR new items, so those are the new vendor packs for existing items, place them on a grid, complete the required fields, and approve. And I did get a question from Tabitha. She's asking, can you run a list of all outstanding changes rather than have to look up each item? And that's a great question. Right now, I'm more focusing on if you are looking at an item already and you're trying to figure out what's holding that up, then you could look at the Changes tab and then how you would resolve that. So if you're trying to find out a list of all outstanding changes, there are two different things that you can do. One, if you are a data sync vendor, you can go to your data sync task list, and in the type column, filter to only see items with CHG. That means that those are change requests. Or you can filter to find items with OPR new under type column. OPR new means that it's a new vendor pack. It's going to be usually one of three things. It's either going to say new, OPR new, or CHG for change. And the other option is if it's created by somebody else and there is a change request, it's going to go to your general task list, which we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. But you would bring up your task list and see if there's anything in your task list with CHG, and you can filter to that. So we are going to be talking about that in a few minutes, but that's a great question, Tabitha. So any other questions so far? Okay, we will move on then to your returned items task list. if an in-process item is returned to the vendor role for updates, it's going to go to your returned items task list. So if you've synced over your items and you put them in your grid, you completed the information, you approved it, it went through, it went on to the merchant role, if at some point before it becomes operational, it gets returned to you, it's going to show up in this returned items task list. Now, if your profile is set up correctly, you will get an email alert that the items have been returned to you. If you do not currently get the email alert and would like to, you can email imahelp@searshc.com and they will work on getting your profile updated with your email so that you do get an alert when anything is returned. Otherwise, you would want to go in and check that on a regular basis. But again, if your email is set up correctly, it shouldn't be necessary. You should get an email whenever items are returned to you. So to access the returned items task list, it's underneath Data Catalog, and it's that second option. It's going to load this page, and you would select your paid UNS number and your SHC division, and then you would click Get Task List. So this bigger image right here, that's what the task list looks like. And you might want to see why the item was returned to you if you don't know. It's possible sometimes your buying team will reach out to you to give you a heads up through email that they returned some items, but sometimes they don't. So you always want to check and see why they returned it so that you know what you need to do to resolve whatever is pending before approving it back through, or it may just come right back to you. So to see what the comments are, if you scroll all the way over to the right of the page, under the Details column, you can click Show Details. And it'll pop up in a new window. In here, we can see under Comments, Update Cost to $3.95. So maybe this is, maybe you originally processed and then you renegotiated with the buying team and agreed upon a different cost. And it's not operational yet, so they returned it to you to update the cost before it becomes operational. There's tons of reasons why they could have returned an item to you. So you always want to click Show Details in order to see why. And I did get a question from Pat asking if this is for goods returned, and oh, I just answered the question, yeah. So it's not for goods returned. It's for if they return an item during the setup process. So good. So again, just click Show Details to see why they returned it. And if you have any issue with why it was returned, or you're not understanding why it was returned still after reviewing the comments, reach out to your buying teams. So let's say that you're fine with whatever they requested. Say you are going to update that cost, just like they mentioned in the comments. You would select the item here on the very far left under the SEL column. You can select multiple items if you want to go ahead and do all these at once. Otherwise, just select whichever items you want to reapprove and click Create Grid. And this time, when you create a grid, you have to enter a grid name. Now, when you do a new item grid, you don't have to name it. It names it by default. But if you're doing any other kind of grid, if you're doing a changes grid or returned items grid, or I think the other one is return changes grid. If you're doing any other grid besides a new item grid, then you have to enter a grid name. And then click Save, and it will create your grid. And then you would go ahead and make whatever requested updates were and click Approve. So in this instance, it was a cost change that was requested. They wanted the cost to be updated. And the cost is located on the Vendor Pack tab. So you have two options to find that. You can either click Vendor Packs to bring up all the Vendor Pack related fields, or you could click All right here, and it would bring back all fields that you have access to. But then you would have to scroll through all of those fields until you could find cost. And then you would click Approve. And just like yesterday when we talked about the grid history, whenever the grid is approved, the status will display as completed. So any questions about the returned items task list? Okay, we're going to move on to the Change Existing Items feature, also known as the Changes Grid. There are a lot of changes that can be synced over from your data sync provider if you are a data sync vendor. And IMA accepts changes and updates to in-process and operational items from the data pool catalog for specific fields. This is a list of fields that IMA will accept changes for from your data sync provider. And one question we do get about syncing over changes is if a vendor is new to their data sync provider, but they have older items in IMA that maybe they created a few years ago before they joined data sync, you can actually do, you would have to reach out to your data sync contact. But I know that it is possible to do some sort of back sync from IMA to your data sync provider to get your older items into your data catalog. And then after that point, you could sync over changes for your older items once you've synced them to your data sync provider. And I got another question, is data sync the same as an 832 file? I have no clue what an 832 file is. Does that have to do with EDI maybe? Because I know they have a lot of different numbers. Okay, that I don't know. I don't think data sync is necessarily the same as an 832 file, but there might be some sort of connection there. But I don't know anything about EDI. So I would reach out to your data sync provider or to your EDI contact. And they could probably provide more, better direction on that. We do have, oh, okay. Now they're saying 832 file is considered a data catalog. It might be another provider for data catalogs. I'm not sure. I know the two main ones we use are OneWorld Sync and OpenText or JXS, but there are other data catalog providers. So I don't know. That's it's just outside of my realm of knowledge. So I would recommend that you reach out to your data catalog contact or your EDI contact. Okay, so there are a lot of changes or updates to other fields that you may want to do that cannot be synced over and have to be created within IMA. Now some of these changes can be created using the Changes Grid. I know some of you that responded at the beginning of the presentation said you've only done manual changes. Well, if you see your change that you usually do manually, if you see it on this list, you may want to consider switching over to doing it on the Changes Grid because you might find that it is much more efficient and just easier to do, especially if you're doing it for multiple items. So these are the fields that can be updated using the Changes Grid. And real quick, I forgot to mention, you can do changes up to 50 items at a time, and you can do multiple changes. You don't just have to do one change for those 50 items. You could do 3, 4, or 5 changes for those 50 items all at one time. So that's why it can be much more efficient than doing it manually. So we're going to do a brief high-level overview of doing a Changes Grid, and then I'm actually going to do a demo in IMA to walk you through in a bit more detail. So starting off, you would hover over Data Catalog and click Change Existing Items. And then you would select the fields that need to be changed up here in the Section 1, where I have the arrow. And then in Section 2, you would enter your G10s, KSNs, or the core div item numbers of the items that need to be changed. Now what's really nice about these fields, whenever you see these bigger fields and they have the arrow pointing up and arrow pointing down, you can actually copy and paste into those fields. So you could copy and paste from a Word file, or you could copy and paste from an Excel file or an email. So that's something that's really nice to be able to use versus having to manually enter in every item one at a time. Now, another option you have, if you don't know the exact G10s or KSNs or core div items, you can search for the items that you're wanting to do the change request for. So you would enter your search criteria here, and you do need to enter at least one of your search criteria. Personally, I think it's if you can get a hold of those KSNs or G10s or core div items, I think it's much easier, because otherwise you're going to come up with a list, and that list may be really long, and you'd have to search through that list to find your items. So once you do enter that information, though, this is what you would see. It comes back with the list. In this example, there are 62 search results. So you would select the items that you want to do the changes for under the Select column, and then click Create Grid. So again, if you do know the G10s and KSNs, that would be my recommendation, is just to copy and paste those in on the left side of the screen. So just like with the Return Changes grid, you have to enter a grid name, and then you click Save. Now whatever fields you selected in Section 1 in that first page, that's going to show up here in your default view. So in that example, I had selected cost, so it's showing up in my default view here, and you'll see that the box up at the top is checked, and the place for the new values is highlighted in green. So you would enter your changes on the green lines, and then you would click Approve. And just like yesterday, if you come back with any errors, you would go back into your grid to view the errors and resolve any of them, and click Approve again. And whenever no errors are found, the status description will read completed. So I do want to make a call out that if you do initiate a change, please be sure to approve it, because this is the most common error, not just that vendors make, but any user. This is one of the most common errors that they make, is creating a change request, initiating it, but not actually approving it. And a quick note about cost changes. So if you have Sears items, Sears cost changes can be initiated and approved in the vendor role. Sometimes the merchant will initiate these, but as best practice, we usually ask the vendor to initiate it, and then it's going to go to the merchant row for approval. If the merchant does initiate it, it will come to you for approval. For Kmart cost changes, this change is not created directly in IMA. Merchant or vendor must complete the change through the price management application. And there is a hyperlink there, so whenever I send out the PowerPoint, if you want to go to that application, you can click the hyperlink. If you have any questions or want any additional training about that specific application, you can reach out to Price Change Request at SearsHC.com. And even if you're a Kmart vendor, you may or may not go into this application. It depends on your merchant team and whether or not they want you going in there, and they would like for you to complete the request. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to IMA, and I'm going to do a demo with the Changes grid. So you come up to Data Catalog, and then you go down and click Change Existing Items. All right. So in Section 1, this is where you select what you want to change. So let's say that I want to change my cost for my Sears items. I would just select that. And then let's say I also want to change my, well, let's leave it there right now, and I'll show you how to add in an extra change request if you forgot to select it off of this first page. So then, if we scroll down the page, we see Section 2. So real quick, I'm going to go grab my KSNs from my Excel file, so just give me 1 second. Okay, and I'm back to IMA now, and I'm going to copy and paste those KSNs directly into the field. And then I'm going to click Create Grid. And it can take a second. If you have a lot of items, if you're doing up to the 50 limit, this could take a couple of minutes to set up. It depends on how many people are using the system at the time. But the first thing you do is you enter a grid name, and then you click Save. So I would just recommend entering something that you would recognize if you need to step away from your computer and then come back to this change request the next day. So if you're doing a cost change, you might want to enter cost change. I'm just going to put my name on there for now. Okay, so this is my default view, and since I selected cost, it's showing up right here. But let's say I meant to select the vendor stock number, and I want to do a change request for the vendor stock number too. That is located on the vendor pack tab. So I would click the vendor pack tab, and then I would scroll over to the right until I found my vendor stock number. It's right here. So anything that has a box located over the title of it, you can select that and do a change request for it. So let's say I also wanted to change the fabric content of my item. Well, fabric content is located on the Packages tab, so I would click Packages and locate the fabric metal content column. It's right here, so I'm going to select that. Oh, but I forgot to actually put in my changes for the vendor stock number. Well, instead of continuing to go back between those tabs, once you've selected it, you can click Changes right here, the radio button with Changes, and it'll take me back to my default view, and it's going to bring in those fields that I selected on the other tabs. So now everything that I want to change is right here. So to make your change, you just do it like you would do during the new item setup, where you click into it. For fabric, it comes up with this box. Let's say it's actually 100% polyester, so I'm going to delete that other one and change the percentage, and then I'm going to copy down. And then cost. Let's say we decided on a new cost of $10.95. And again, you can use those double arrows here to copy down that answer. And then vendor stock number. Let's say I used the wrong vendor stock number. I wanted it to be something different, so I could just enter that and copy it down. And then once you've entered in all of your changes, then you would click Approve. And that's going to take you to your grid history screen where it's going to process. And it may take a few seconds. Okay, so here we can see that this is queued. This is my grid name, Mona Changes. So it's currently processing. Once it's completed, it'll come up with the completed under the status description. If there are any errors, then it'll let me know there are errors. But here, see, it processed very quickly. It's already completed. So now the cost change would be in the merchant role, and if any of the other roles need approval, if any of the other fields need approval by other roles, it would go to those roles. Otherwise, it's going to process through to hold state and become operational. So any questions about the changes grid? Okay, then we'll move on to data catalog notifications. So the data catalog notifications page will inform you when new items fail to load during data sync. So if you sync over new items and they're successful, you won't get any sort of notification. They will just be available in your task list. But if they fail to load, you will get a notification. You will also get a notification if changes initiated via data sync are either successful or failed. So any changes that you initiate over, you will get a notification regardless of whether they go through or they don't go through. And then finally, if you have items that have been changed or deleted by an internal role, you will get a notification. So any items that were synced over, you will get a notification for if they get changed or deleted by an internal role. And I did get a question asking if the notification is via email, and it is not necessarily via email, and that's what we're going on to the next page. So this is the other feature that we offer for the data catalog menu. So in that drop-down, you will see data catalog notifications. Now, some of you may be getting emails If your profile is set up correctly, you may get an email letting you know that you have new notifications. I'm not sure if that feature or if that can get turned off or if that's on for everybody by default. But you may be getting emails that you have notifications, but to actually see what those notifications are, you would need to come in to IMA and hover over Data Catalog and go to Data Catalog Notifications. Then it's going to load this page, and you would have to enter criteria to focus your list and to search. So you could enter division, category. If you're looking for a specific G10, you could enter that. Just be sure if you're entering a UPC, the 12-digit G10, that you're entering it in the retail G10 field. If you try to enter that into your shipped G10 field, then you may not get any search results back. And vice versa, if you're looking for a carton G10, so your shipping G10, make sure it goes into the correct field, because if you put that into your retail G10 field, you may not get any search results back. You can also select your order dones if you have multiple order dones that you are assigned to. And then over on the right, you have some additional information that you can enter. You have your entity type. You also have your create date, and you can put a range there for your create date. And then finally, if you just want to look at specific notification codes, you could select that from this drop-down notification code. So if you just want to see stuff that failed, or you just want to see changes that were successful, you could select that from the notification code drop-down. And there is one more, vendor stock number is also another search field that you can use to look at your list for your data catalog notifications. So once you do enter your information, you would click search. Now you will likely see multiple lines for a single item, and this is normal. This is as expected. So don't let that confuse you. So your list may over time get really large. If you sync over a lot of items, you may have a lot of lines here in your data catalog notifications. So you can actually clear these out by selecting it here in the action column and then clicking the remove button here at the top. And that's how you would clear out specific lines. If you want to completely clear out your list, you could click clear all. If you know that you've reviewed everything, you don't need to refer back to this information again, you can click clear all. So the notification code and notification description provides detailed information about the status of the items submitted. And those are located right here. And you can click this icon next to the notification code dropdown to view the code legend. And real quick, I do have another question asking what the vendor stock number actually means. Is it the vendor style number? I think a lot of times vendor stock number and vendor style number, sometimes those terms can get thrown around interchangeably. I think technically they are different things, but a lot of people will refer to the same number using either of those descriptives. But it is owned by you as the vendor, so it can be whatever you would like for it to be. It's kind of an identifying field. So if you have a group of items that's being sold to us at a single time, that kind of, let's say if it's apparel, maybe it's the same style of shirt and it's just different colors and different sizes, you may give that entire selection a single vendor stock number just so that you can identify it as a group. So again, that is something that's owned by you. And like I said, vendor style number, a lot of people do refer to it as the vendor style number. And I think technically there are different things, but they usually end up being the same number, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but that has been my experience in the past working in the system. Okay, so if you click the notification code icon, you can view the code legend. And this is what that legend looks like. So it's going to list out your codes, the E1 through E8. and it's going to provide some details about that code. And then to the right of that, you saw your notification description right here. And your notification description is going to provide specific details for item status, the reason for the outcome, and or possible corrective action. So if we look at E1, E1 says SHC was not able to load the item into IMA. So this sounds like it's probably something that may happen if you're syncing over a new item and the sync just doesn't go through properly. You may get back in E1. For E2 through E5, it looks like all of those have to do with change requests. So anytime that you sync over a change request, you will first off be alerted that it was successful or that it failed. So here we have change request failed because of a rule violation. Then we have that the change request was deleted by an internal user, or if it was returned by an internal user, you'll get a notification. Also, if the change request that you sync over, again, gets modified by an internal user before it goes operational, you'll get a notification about that as well. If an internal user deletes an item that you synced over, let's say you synced over some items and you worked them through your role, and then it was decided that they weren't going to go through with the buy for that specific item, it may be deleted by an internal role. And it will notify you whenever you have synced something over and it ends up getting deleted by somebody else, you will get a notification. If your change goes operational and it's fully successful, you're going to get a notification. That's E7. And then E8, delete processed. I think that is if, I don't know, I'm actually not sure the difference between E6 and E8, except maybe that it's operational, except that you can't actually delete operational items. So if you have E6 and E8, something was deleted, and I would reach out to either the help desk to find out more information about what that means, or you can also reach out to your data catalog contact for more information too. So, and if your item does fail when it gets synced over to IMA, you really need to reach out to your data sync contact, because that's something more on the data sync side. We can't do anything or help you with your items until they actually make it into our system. So if you do reach out to the help desk, they are just going to refer you to data sync as well. And if you're having trouble locating your items in your task list, I usually want, a couple times a month, I'll get an email from a vendor who's attended one of these webinars because they can't get their task list to load for them. Either nothing is there or it just won't load. So if your task list won't load, like it just never moves on, double check that you're using the correct browser, that you're using Internet Explorer, and that you have compatibility mode set, because that's usually the reason why your task list won't load. And if you can get your task list to load, but there's just nothing in your task list, try searching for the exact G10 and make sure that you're entering the G10 into the correct field. So if it's a retail G10, make sure it's going into the retail G10 field, not the shipping G10 field. Otherwise, it's not going to come back with any search results either. So any questions so far on data catalog notifications? Okay, then we're going to move on to your general task list. So any change requests that are submitted by another role that requires a vendor approval is going to be found in your general task list. If you hover over task list and click general, that's how you access it. And then just like with one of the previous task lists, you have to enter your paid-ons and your SHC division, and then click get task list. Your paid-ons is optional, but you do have to select the SHC division. So this is what your task list looks like. So over on the right, you would want to scroll all the way over until you can see the Details column. And you would want to click the Show Details hyperlink so you can see what change requests were made. So when you click that link, it's going to open up in a little window. And here you can see under Change Detail, the cost says $40. So most likely your merchant created a change request for this item. And since it's a change request, it does require approval by you as the vendor. So it would go to your general task list. So if you agree with this, if this is something you had discussed and agreed on, then you would want to approve it. And real quick, I want to show under Type. This is where you can see what type of, basically why the item is in your task list. Because I was talking earlier about how this might say New, or OPR New, or CHG for change. So here these are change requests, and they are indicated by CHG under the Type column. So you have this column displaying as well in your New Item task list. So if you have CHG listed there and it's your New Item task list, your Data Catalog New Item task list, then that means you synced over those changes. If it says New, then those are newly synced items, and if it says OPR New, those are vendor packs that you synced over. So coming back to your general task list, if you agree with that change, you would select the item in the very far left column under SEL, and then you would click Multi-Edit. So once you get into Multi-Edit, you would click the Workflow tab, and then you would select the radio button next to Approve, and click Check for Error, Submit Workflow Tasks. Now if you have a lot of items here, if you have more than one, I would recommend clicking the radio button at the bottom, and it will automatically select that same button for any items that you have here. Otherwise, if you had 10 items here and you try to select them individually, that's going to get kind of old after a while. So again, if you select it from the very bottom, it will select it for all of your items up here. So if there are only warnings or no errors, you can click the Submit button again. So if there are any warnings, you do not have to resolve warnings. They can be ignored. So if you do get warnings, just click the Submit button up here one more time. If you get errors, they have to be corrected before the changes can be approved. So any questions about your general task list? Okay, going over some key points that we covered today, because we did cover a variety of topics. So first off, quick search is just a snapshot of an item, and it may not be accurate with the location of the item. You should view the Changes tab to view where each component of the item is located. In-process items returned to the vendor role for updates will be located in the Returned Items task list. Change requests for some fields can be synced over from your data sync provider. After syncing, approve the changes from the New Item Data Catalog task list. Some fields can be updated using the Changes grid or Change Existing Items feature. Multiple change requests for up to 50 items can be done at once. Review your Data Catalog notifications for details on items that fail to load during sync, or to confirm whether changes initiated via data sync were successful or failed. And then finally, change requests submitted by another role that require vendor approval will be located in your general task list. So those are just some key points to take away from. Tomorrow we are covering maintenance in IMA, and we will be covering some really specific tasks that you might need to complete, such as changing ship points, or using different ship points for different DC locations. We're going to cover adding a new carton, adding new vendor packs, duplicating vendor packs, setting the dimension exception indicator. So we're going to be focusing on a lot of really specific tasks tomorrow during the maintenance session, and there will be quite a few demos that we will be walking through. So at this point, does anyone have any questions about today's session? Okay, if you think of any, feel free to email vendoruniversity@searshc.com. I will stay on the line for 5 or 10 minutes, however long people want to stay and ask questions, in case you do think of any in a little bit. Other than that, have a great day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.